Hello, Wanderers, and welcome back to Chiara's Slow Travel Adventure. I think the most asked questions that I get on this channel are all about au pairing, and especially au pairing in China. So apparently you're really curious about au pairing in China. I get so many comments asking me to how to be an au pair in China, and for that I've already made a whole video about it and you can watch it over here, but also about problem solving. I think the most question I get asked through comments and by Instagram are all problems connected to childcare mostly and host family issues. So today I'm here to solve all of your conundrums and a little bit more that you might have to face in some cases and that can really interfere with your great experience abroad as an au pair, but especially as an au pair in China. So that is from navigating host family problems, childcare issues, cultural language barriers, but also loneliness. Today we're covering all those topics and I'll try to give some suggestions and advice based, of course, on my very personal experience on how to face those challenges and possibly to solve them as well. So without further ado, let's get into it. Let's start with family issues. When you're an au pair, you must understand that you're spending your time, your every second basically with somebody else. And of course, their set of rules are of course very relevant and important, not just for their life, not just for your job, but for your everyday activities, even for your everyday routine. Therefore, my very first tip here is absolutely fundamental, and that is to keep good communication. Communicating correctly is vital when it comes to au pairing because you're basically spending all of your time with the family. Well, maybe not all of it, but most of your time. You're living with them, you eat with them, you go on holiday with them. Your everyday routine depends so much on how you perceive and you're perceived with the family, and that can impact a lot on your personal experience as an au pair. So my very first suggestion is that you need to remember that communication is vital. If you're encountering challenges, if you have any kind of issue, keeping the communication clear and open, but also of course very polite, is the first step in any au pair experience. And I'm not just talking about China. I understand that in some countries you might also encounter a language barrier. So when you want to communicate something very specific, I strongly suggest you use apps or translating apps to communicate exactly what you're trying to say. Of course, you can try if you can with their language, or they can try to understand yours. But depending, of course, on each and every side's level of English or Chinese in this case, it might be difficult. So using translating apps can really help, especially if you're trying to get through a specific piece of info that is important for them to understand in the correct way. When it comes to communicating, especially in the beginning when you don't know the family very well and they don't know you very well yet, to kind of keep a once a week or maybe once every 2 weeks meeting with them where you can kind of regroup, you can show them your thoughts if you have some doubts about something, if something is not clear, if something is not working. But also remember to take out also the positives as well. So for example, let's say that maybe in the beginning you were struggling with childcare. At this point you can also discuss, this aspect has been improved. Maybe the kid didn't like you very much in the beginning, but they like you a little bit more now. Or maybe they've learned a few words that I can now use more easily. Those things are also positive things to take at the table at this point. When you need to communicate with them in this kind of occasion, I strongly suggest that you kind of list down the things you want to talk with them, because I understand that in the moment you're in front of them, you might forget about it. Some things can get missed. And so rather than taking it in a second moment where maybe they're busy or maybe they cannot put their mind into it, I strongly suggest that you're ready beforehand with all of your info. My strongest suggestion here is to keep communication clear and positive. Be polite regardless of the country or the language or cultural barrier you face in any situation, depending on where you're from and where you're staying. Remember that being polite and positive is always the best attitude. I understand that at this point you might feel like you have some difficulties. It could be related to childcare. Maybe you're working too many hours, or maybe you have some issues when it comes to the routine, or maybe you're not comfortable with something related, I don't know, to physical problems. Whatever it is, remember that keeping a positive mind and a positive mindset is the most important. I understand you're feeling uncomfortable, and maybe you're upset, and maybe you're annoyed, and you really wish to show that how much that bothers you. But that kind of attitude, although it might show how much of a difficulty you have with something, will not solve the problem per se. So try to keep a positive mindset. Be open-minded to their suggestion as well, especially when it comes to things like childcare. I understand that you might encounter situations where you disagree completely with maybe the way they bring up their children, or maybe with something related to childcare in general. I understand, but you must understand that first of all, that's their own kids. So although you work with them, and I know, like believe me, I know it's a struggle to adjust to a very different childcare situation. However, your best effort would be to adapt, to kind of get used to it and work around it instead of against it. And if you have issues, I'm not saying you shouldn't tell them. You have to tell them very clearly. I don't know, maybe you are being overworked, you're working too many hours. That is why, if you watch the video suggested previously, you will see that one of the most important things is to get boundaries, and these things, working hours, holidays, and free time, and so on, specifically clear right before you get there. Because once you're there, things can get really complicated. But if you put everything very clear before you arrive there, it's going to be so much harder also for them to change their route. And if you start to feel like you've been overworked, you can just point out, this is not what we agreed upon. Can we fix the schedule? Maybe they need you to work more hours on certain days, they've noticed. You can be open to that, but remember to ask something for it. Say maybe they need you to work more hours during a day, then you can ask one more holiday every, I don't know, 2 weeks, for example. All those problems can be solved, I promise. You want to be firm, but you also want to be open-minded every time you communicate with the host family. And for that, remember to have a written agreement beforehand where you are listed with all of your duties, with your holiday, working hours, and all the important information related to the activity you have to do, what are your rights and your duties in the family. That way, things won't get too much out of hand. Moving on to our next topic, and probably the one that I get asked the most, that is childcare. Childcare is difficult in general, even when we're talking about your own children or your own siblings. And you have to keep in mind that for that, every child is unique, every child is different, especially when you're traveling to another country, say for example China. Some issue may be related to the fact that every child is different, have a unique character, but also that sometimes there are some cultural barriers. Taking my experience as an example, this last summer I was in China as an au pair. I had childcare issues, and to be honest, I somehow had the same issues also my first time traveling in China. Now, that can be related to many things. The first time was probably also out of low experience when it came to childcare. But in this case, I cannot even say that it's for that. I am an English teacher in kindergarten, so I should be able to know how to handle kids of that age. Still, this time around, I still had problems with childcare. So if you are in this situation, and I hear so many of you asking me about it, so I am guessing that might be a problem that a lot of people encounter. Don't think that the problem is you. In most cases, it's not you. And there are many ways that you can solve issues and problems related to childcare. The first thing you have to consider is that, as we said, every child is different. Children with different cultural backgrounds compared to yours will have a different upbringing as well. And some rules that are usually applied in your own country might not be the same in another place, say, for example, in China. if you're in China and this is your situation, let me know in the comments down below if this picture is what you're experiencing. Usually in China, there are two types of parents. Ones that are very strict, more like the famous tiger moms, but they are less and less common and popular. Or the opposite, the overly do whatever you want kind of type. So if that is your case, and that was my case in both situations, you will end up probably with children that are overspoiled, or at least compared to your own country, to your own cultural background. Where I'm from, children, yes, they can be more or less spoiled, but usually there are some rules, there are some things that are required for children to respect, and a certain standard of independency and also of capabilities. When it comes to China, you might notice the situations where, for example, there could be a nanny, there could be a grandma or a grandpa, a nana, yeye, where the children go every time they have issues. And depending on the family's rules, these people can cover more and more or less and less needs when it comes to the childcare and the child's needs. For example, in some situations, you can indeed find kids that do not even need to walk to get something because the grandparents or the nanny will just pick them up and take them there. Or some situations where if they need to open some kind of package for getting snacks and so on, there will be somebody else doing it for them because they will just do something like
Wine that they want the thing but they cannot open it.
Now, these kind of situations is indeed very common, and I understand that it might not be the same with your country, but still you have to understand that you have to adapt to this kind of situation. Yes, you can talk things through with your host family, kind of pointing out some things that can be improved. However, you cannot change the way they decide to bring up their own kids. So you will have to play along with it. Also, remember that with kids, patience and empathy actually go a long way. It might take you some time for the kids to get used to you, and that is for a series of reasons. I definitely had problems having the kids open up to me the last time I was in China, and that was very uncommon because I'm usually somebody that the children like to play with and spend time with because I'm very playful with them. So that was indeed a new experience for me. And that can be related to many things. It's a character thing. It is also, as we said, it depends on their family environment. If there are a lot of people they used to relate to inside of the house, or maybe they have aunts and nannies and grandparents that spend already a lot of time with them, you're just a plus. And you're not just a plus, you're also a plus that doesn't maybe speak their language, that is a stranger, and that they don't know yet how this person works. In some cases, children might be overly open to you. In some cases, it might be the opposite. If the second one applies to you as it was for me, and if you want to see my issues, you can watch my video about my very first week as an au pair in China this last summer, which was intense. You can see how I try to approach the problem. So be patient, be empathic, try to understand how their routine works, what they like, what they don't like, and work with that. Recognizing the child's personality and energy level is also very important. If they're very outdoorsy guys, or if they like to spend more time indoors, what kind of activities they like to do, that can also make a difference. Try to work on that side to get their attention, and then you can work with them so much better. Establishing also certain comforting routines. For example, if you take them to school every day, or my host mom suggested that I can try to give them some very small snacks once in a while to kind of, that's basically bribery. But with kids, it can work sometimes. I wouldn't say to go overboard with that. And remember, if that is something you'd like to try, always discuss it with the parents. And that is my other suggestion and tips when it comes to childcare. Always discuss everything you wish to try, every problem we have with the family. First of all, they know their kids the best, so they might be able to help you understand how can the problem be solved. But also, if you're trying to do something and that something is not necessarily in their mindset, you can encounter issues because of that. For example, I wouldn't have considered using snacks as a bribery by myself, and I wouldn't try it unless it was the host mom, the host dad, that told me that that was a good idea or that it was possible. So in these situations, I wouldn't suggest you go on your own way, but to try to discuss it with the family first. Also, remember to blend educational and playful activities. So, kind of doing games that require maybe some English or doing activities that make learning more playful. There are a bunch of ideas when it comes to that. You can find a lot of them on YouTube, you can find a lot of them on other platforms. Remember to keep clear and compassionate boundaries. And what I mean by that is that you shouldn't let them step on you, but you should also try to be flexible to understand their own environment. If you try to just be strict with them or kind of set only boundaries, always say, oh, you can't do that, you can't do that, they will start to build a negative relationship around you and around your image. And that is going to be so much harder to fix, rather than trying to be more flexible in the beginning and then slowly adding on some strictness and some more rules. So, of course, I'm not saying you have to let them do whatever they want. You have to ask the family first, what are the boundaries the children should keep, and your own boundaries as well. So say, for example, that you do not like for the children to just open and be always in your room with you all the time as if they just can come in any moment. Tell the family and say, okay, I need some time where kids cannot enter my space because I want to be feeling comfortable and relaxed, and I don't want to have them all over the place. That is totally legit. That is totally something you can do. Just discuss these things prior with the family in those kind of meetings that I was suggesting earlier, and things are going to be so much easier. But also remember to try to be a little bit more flexible. So I understand that in your own place, probably nobody enters ever your room, but the kids might be curious about you. They might be curious about this new stranger, and letting them into your own world can help them also open up to you. I'm not saying you should do that all the time, but maybe you can have like specific times. Say, for example, is storytelling time. Maybe you can read them a story before they go to bed in English or in whatever language you're teaching them. And you can do that in your own room at a specific time or at a specific day. And it can be like for half an hour, for an hour, 15 minutes, whatever it is. And there you set a boundary, but you also opened up to them. So I think these kind of things, trying to be flexible, but also have boundaries, is really important when you're an au pair in any country, but especially in places like China. And moving on to the outside world of the au pair, because to be honest, we always talk about problems related to the family, which I understand are the most relevant, usually problems that we face as au pairs, especially in China. I personally traveled with au pair the last time I was in China this last summer, and it made my experience so much easier and smoother. An agency will help you in the process to find and look for the right visa and the entire visa process. They will help you with all the bureaucracy, all the paperwork you will need, and they of course will help you to find the perfect host family. I was pretty lucky to travel with au pair. I did look them up and they had great reviews and comments. During my stay there, I had great support from au pair. Of course, if you find yourself in any trouble or any difficulty, your first contact would be the agency. So it's really important to find one that is trustworthy and then can really back you up in times of needs. But also when it comes to visa, the process of extending it if you need it, or just for asking it and all the paperwork, they will cover it for you. So an agency, I think, is really useful, especially in certain countries. Yes, you can find a host family without an agency, but it's going to be a little bit more unclear sometimes what they offer and what they don't offer. The pay might be higher, but you will have maybe to cover more expenses. For example, you will have to pay your own insurance, your own tickets, and you won't be offered, for example, the opportunity to study Chinese which I had a great time, and it was a great experience. Everything went on so smoothly. They helped me in the process of finding the perfect host family. They helped me with the visa process, prepared all the paperwork I needed for that. And also while I was there, they offered events that we could attend every month. There were also Chinese classes included. I had insurance. I had my ticket for coming back to Italy paid in the end. Aupair was probably the best agency I worked with so far. But there can also be other issues that can make your experience as an au pair not always the best, unless, as we said before, you try to be flexible in this case as well. And that is language and cultural barriers. Now, regardless of where you go, you're going to meet this issue wherever you end up being an au pair. But of course, if you're an au pair in China and you come from, say, the Western world, or I don't know, Africa or other continents, you might experience these issues more. Language barriers can really be a problem. So I strongly suggest that you keep a mindset that is open-minded and also open to learning. So the best approach is to embrace a learning mindset. For example, if you can, try to take classes of the language of the country you're visiting. In this case, is China. Maybe you can use some apps. That's what I did before going there, and maybe while you're there as well, because that can really help you improve. Apps, although they are not the key to learn a language, they can really help into building a base, and that is what I did. And also keep doing it, even just for 5-10 minutes per day. Learning with apps can really be helpful, because then you're in an immersive environment where you hear the language every day. And if you're open to try to speak it, although you might not always be comfortable about it, still using apps to review can really help to soak in the immersive learning you're going through and help you even more. But it's not just about the language, it's also about the culture. So ask about local costumes, traditions, festivities, holidays, art, whatever it is that the culture is about. I mean, why did you go there otherwise? Isn't it not to learn about the culture? Is it not to learn the language? What are you trying to achieve to be an au pair in China? Because to be honest, if it's just childcare, you could do it anywhere. And China would probably not be your first choice if you were not interested, at least in, I don't know, culture, in the language, in something else outside of childcare. Childcare in China is definitely no easy task. And if you're doing it just for that, I strongly suggest you go somewhere else. Therefore, I'll be just assuming you're there for the culture anyways. So asking about it in a very polite way is always a great thing to do. Now, what I do strongly suggest you don't talk about unless you know them very well. And even in that case, I would still be very careful on certain topics. To be honest, in China in general, it's best to not touch too much on those topics, but especially in the host family and with people you don't know very well. And those are topics related to geopolitical situations, the government, and human rights. You can try to talk about it, but remember to be very respectful and polite. First of all, because you know nothing about their own mindset. You don't know how a Chinese person mind and culture works compared to yours. So comparing is not the reason I believe we travel. It's not to compare, it's not to judge, it's to be open and try to understand how other places, other countries, other people kind of view the world and the issues around it. So try not to be too judgmental. And if you have judgments, keep them for yourself. I know it might sound pretty strong to say, but that is the safest route to take, especially in a country like China. Otherwise, when it comes to art and culture and traditions, you're very much welcome to ask as many questions as you like. Just keep the more difficult topics out of the conversation, at least in the beginning. Also, sharing your own tradition, your own culture is something they're interested into. And lastly, remember to practice patience. I know that once you're in a new country, you just wish that you could speak the language already. You wish to already know how to move around, how to act like a local, but that's not how it works. Learning takes time, adjusting takes time. Be patient and be kind to yourself. that is going to take a while, and that is okay. Another important aspect that often gets overlooked is inclusion. They need to be part of something. I understand that when you travel abroad, especially as an au pair, you might feel very lonely. Maybe you're homesick, maybe you're missing your friends, your families, your cat, whatever it is. You might feel like you're in a world where nobody knows you, where nobody speaks your language, and you might feel a little bit lonely at times. Guys, that is so common. I am somebody that loves traveling abroad because I want to be as much away from Italians as possible. But even then, sometimes I feel like, man, I wish there was somebody here that could, I don't know, not even speak my own language, but maybe just know who I am. That would be nice, right? So I understand this is a problem that often happens with au pairs, especially in an environment where there are not a lot of foreigners around you or other people that speak your own language. One of my tips here is to try to engage locally. You can try to seek out community events, you can try to join hobby groups, local meetups with other people. There might be foreigners, there might be expatriates, other people that you might feel some more connection with around the place you live. Connecting online is another very good option. You can join social media groups or forums of other foreigners and expats in your same situation that might really lower your loneliness. Also, initiating conversation. If you meet somebody that feels friendly enough, you can just try to strike a conversation. Could be at a coffee shop. For example, when I was in Thailand, I had to wait so many hours for a train and it started to rain, so I needed to get covered, and there was just one single table under this type of pergola. So the girl right underneath it asked me, okay, would you like to join me? And we struck the conversation and it was lovely. You can definitely try, spend times in places like cafes or parks and look around yourself if you find somebody that looks friendly enough to strike a conversation with. A little bit more difficult it can be when you try to build relationship with locals. Now here there is a cultural barrier, but it is also a language barrier. If you don't have this problem, say for example that you already speak Mandarin, that is so much easier, but there's still going to be a cultural barrier. But you can definitely try. You can for sure make local friends. It might just require and take a little bit longer compared to doing the same with foreigners, where you kind of have a common background. You're both foreigners in a foreign land. I don't know, you're both from Europe, for example. You have similar cultural background compared to the others. So usually with foreigners, it is easier to get into a good relationship with. And at the end of the day, remember that it is so normal to feel lonely. Sometimes you just want to call your best friend and complain for hours because you have problems with the host family and with the host mom is so annoying and the child is always misbehaving and you don't know what to do anymore. You just want to go back. Please, I want to go back. But don't give up. This is my suggestion. Don't give up. The entire thing is so worth it in the end, and you're going to feel so empowered for having struggled through all of your challenges and survived them. And then you can go back to your own country like a hero, like somebody that learned something, accomplished something, that didn't give up, that built a relationship, learned the language, learned about the culture, got in a great relationship with the kids and the family, and everybody loved you. And I promise that all of this, it is possible. I know that in the beginning especially it might not feel like that, but I promise you guys it is so possible to achieve that. I stayed in China for 2 months and I was pretty close to this standard. So you can do it. I promise you, you can do it. Don't give up, believe in yourself, struggle through, fight through it, and I promise you will not regret it. Alright guys, I hope these tips were helpful. I tried to share my own experience as well to show you how can these problems actually be solved and achieved. And I hope some of those advices might be helpful to your own experience as well. Now, I'm getting so many questions about problems, especially as in being an au pair in China. I will try to directly take some of them as an example and maybe make future video as a more Q&A. So if you guys have any specific question and you're willing to share your own experience, remember to always consider the privacy as well. So you might want to change the names of the people. So if you have any specific questions or problems you're struggling with, do put them in the comments down below. I like to use them as an example to answer future videos, to take up different and specific examples of issues and problems that you might encounter, especially as an au pair in China. And some problems that one person brings up can really help many others. And if this video was helpful, please remember to give me a thumb up because that really supports me. And hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of my future videos. And I'll see you guys in our next adventure. Say Jian.